Hi, everybody. My name is Stephen McMaster, and I'm going to be presenting a case study on producing single-use plastic-free snack packaging. So just to start off, a little bit of background about who I am. I'm originally from the Boston area, which means I'm going to do my best to suppress my accent and avoid too many Dunkin' Donuts references. And I'm the Lifecycle Innovation Analyst at Impact Snacks. So basically, I work with a small team and producing some of the work that I'm going to discuss today. So what really am I going to discuss here in this case study? We're going to talk about plastic and we're going to talk about packaging, but really I'm talking about the future, and I'm talking about how a small group at Impact is taking on one of the biggest issues in the consumer goods space, and I'm talking about the role of packaging and engineering in that fight. So more on my background. I originally am from the apparel industry. As you may notice, I'm extremely young. I'm 20 years old, so I don't have an extensive career. But as they say, if you want something done in a new way, you get someone who's never done it before. So starting in the apparel industry, I was experimenting with ways of reducing waste. So I noticed an enormous amount of waste that was happening, particularly textile waste. And I thought there had to be something to do about it. When you think about the life cycle of textiles, there's a whole process that goes into producing a textile, all the way from raw material manufacturing. It comes all from all over the world just to end up in a trash can where I was living. And I thought that was strange, and there has to be a way to kind of introduce more circularity to that stream. So I was experimenting with making products out of that textile waste. And to make a long story short of it, I had a viral TikTok. I'm really dating myself here. I had a viral TikTok that was based off of one of these concepts of making apparel out of fabric waste. And it wasn't necessarily just that it was out of waste, but it actually was fashionable. It was comparable or better to something that was existing on the market. And it was interesting, the idea that you could create something and have 600,000 people across the internet see it, is really fascinated me, and it struck me because that means the idea that wasteless things can resonate with consumers, and kind of kept that idea in the back of my head that wasteless things could even be better than things are now. It's not a compromise, and that strikes people. So I got involved with Impact during COVID because my industry started to shut down a little bit. So I jumped ship at really good timing, and I joined this really dynamic team of young people who we all wanted to do good. Of course, that's where it always starts. We wanted to do the right thing. We wanted to make the world a better place, which is the classic trope. But how do you do that? Because if it was about making the world a better place, we wouldn't be in this situation. We wouldn't have any of the problems that we have now. Quite simply, we have to go and drill down and be strategic about the way that we're going to try and make an impact about something. So with that, we're going to hone our focus. We're going to focus in on consumer goods. Because it's such a huge challenge. Consumer goods are a really wasteful industry, so we're going to focus there. People are complacent with convenience and tricked by greenwashing in the consumer space. So a lot of compromises are made to circular and good practices in the sake of convenience, and people are used to that. I'm used to that. Everybody is. And people are tricked by greenwashing, and that's a big problem, especially in the consumer space, because more than anywhere else, you see that businesses are trying to make their consumers think that they're using good practices, when it may not always be the case. And so focusing in on these things, how can we insert ourselves and kind of take advantage of these shortcomings as opportunities, as a way to make an impact in the consumer goods space? So when we're thinking about Impact Snacks, which is the company that was kind of created under this situation, is we want to make consumer goods our price and quality comparable, because again, going back to that convenience factor, people aren't going to make the right choice if it involves a compromise on price or quality. The good choice needs to be effortless. And we decided to focus on superfood snack bars because Americans eat vast quantities of snack bars every day. Most people reach for at least one a day. And when we're thinking especially about packaging, about waste, and about impact, packaging that goes into a product that is consumed for maybe only a few minutes, that's only a dietary supplement, that packaging often lasts forever and is used a single time. For that reason, because of the volume and the single-use nature of superfood snack bars, that's where we decided to place our efforts because we could have the greatest impact. So a lot of things besides that make snack bars one of the most challenging products to make in good practice. So honing in on packaging for a moment, we see that companies with plastic packaging, particularly single-use packaging, need to confront their responsibility here. A lot of accountability does need to happen in the packaging space. If you're listening to marketing or media at all, you hear a lot of organizations are talking about their carbon footprint, which is extremely important, but not a lot of companies are talking about their plastic footprint and the impact there. So the fact of the matter, whether you like it or not, is that packaging companies that work in the packaging space, consumer companies, we are on the front lines of the fight to try and reduce our plastic footprint. We live in a globalized world. Our products make it to every corner of the earth. And even if that result isn't enough of a motivator, the fact of the matter is also that climate, regulatory, and consumer pressures are coming in. So the government is going to start taking more action on the regulatory side, both with incentives and with, or as we like to say, with both with carrots and with sticks. It's increasing, and then also in consumer pressures. So consumers are asking for more. Standards are only continuing to increase in the consumer goods space. So consumers were looking first for plant-based, and now plant-based things are almost the standard, and now consumers are pickier when it comes to ingredients that go into plant-based. The standards keep rising and the consumer pressures keep increasing because every time business does better, it becomes the standard. And then one of the biggest problems, as we've talked about, is the single-use petroleum plastic wrapper. Quite simply, it's just untenable. So it's going to be the target of these pressures because of this untenability. We all are familiar with the bad things that plastic does for the planet. We've seen the pictures of turtles choking, and our job here isn't to be too earthy crunchy because we know that that's not the way that change gets made. Although that voice is important. But the fact of the matter is that every piece of plastic ever made still exists. So thinking about things in historical terms, extant historical items are a rarity, and I'm going to draw back to apparel here because that's what I know best. Is when we're talking about apparel, extant garments, so things from our ancestors, are actually quite rare. It's hard to find a piece of clothing that was made 200, 300, 400 years ago. It's hard to find many of the items that were used 200, 300, 400 years ago are gone, and we consider that normal. So we have a whole antiquing industry around finding items that are from the past. But what does that mean now? The paradigm has shifted. Everything that we're making now is going to last for thousands and thousands of years. So to change the terms a little bit, as we like to put it, it's like if the Pilgrims dropped a wrapper and the wrapper was still clogging up sea life today. The scale of the issue that we're talking about is new and different in a way that is not normal for human behavior, and we need to address the responsibility there, that our impact doesn't just our impact not just today, but it's going to continue in perpetuity in a way that is very new and very different, and that we're not familiar with because we haven't had to encounter the ramifications of it ourselves. So packaging companies, consumer companies have a huge responsible in that fight as we go towards what we talk about net neutrality. So for those who aren't familiar with the term net zero or net neutral, we're going to start hearing it more and more in the next couple months and years as those initiatives become more important in the consumer space. Net zero is a term that is a little bit loose because it hasn't been strictly defined by any leading entity yet. But basically, it you can think of it meaning that your impact or the impact associated with your existence, with your operations, it is neutralized, hopefully, in that it is reduced, and then any neutralization efforts that are needed are taken after the fact. So the reason that packaging companies are and suppliers, businesses are responsible here is because even though consumers demand, we talk about consumer demand and the impact, we believe in consumer demand. We believe it says right on our packaging that consumer spending is the strongest form of activism. That said, consumers can demand, but someone must actualize these efforts. So it does come down to business to put these motions into play here, and that's what we're talking about. Is what kind of tactically that means when we're responding to that consumer demand. One of the problems in this space here, and especially for other consumer brands out there trying to move to better practices, is that we often see that the end brand is responsible for the footprint of the entire supply chain. And that's something that we ran into with Impact, is that our suppliers, our upstream suppliers, did not account for their own footprint. They were not operating at net neutrality, and in that way, that burden fell onto us. This is a financially unsustainable model. So at a period when moving to better practices often has a marginal cost associated with it, for a lot of businesses, although that cost is reducing day by day. When a brand needs to switch to better practices, it's not sustainable for every brand to have to account for the footprint of their entire supply chain. Every member of a supply chain needs to be responsible for the footprint they leave. And we're starting to see that, is that businesses are demanding accountability of their partners who are not necessarily consumer facing. That's a change that's happening, and it's a change that's inevitable because like these brands are responding to consumers, supply chain links are going to be responding to the brands demands there, and we watched that movement happen as our suppliers at Impact started to address and think about their footprint more and take measures to reduce. And it's not just about cost either. It's about measuring and accuracy. So when you want to move to better practices, you have to measure your behavior, measure your products through carbon audits and life cycle assessments. And measuring these things becomes incredibly difficult when your supply chain partners are not accounting for their own footprint. LCA and carbon audits are their whole its own discussion, so I won't get into the weeds with them too much, but the idea being that as more businesses are going to want to be measuring what they're doing, it's going to fall on their supply chain partners to account for their footprint, to add ease there, when we can see also mandatory climate disclosures on the horizon, which are going to require measurement of certain business practices. It's just going to push that kind of inevitable shift into accountability in business. And that means for brands with the impact that they're leaving, but also for their supply chain partners. And then one of the other challenges is that consumers have a hard time giving up single-use convenience. So we're complacent essentially, and that's okay, because we found something that people really like to use, which is single-use packaging. Um, to contrast it with another option, which is reusable packaging. Reusable packaging is better for a circular economy. To think about it in terms, let's say again, of apparel has price per wear. So you pay for an item, and if you divide the cost by the number of times you've worn it, ideally you want to buy clothes that will have a low price per wear, either because you didn't pay much for it or because you wear it often. Thinking about it in those terms, reusable packaging is very good. Um, but if it's less convenient for the user, it won't be adopted at scale. So we see a lot of applications of reusable packaging where you have to mail it back, you have to package it and mail it back, you have to drop it off at a location. And the fact of the matter is it reduces convenience for consumers, and it's not going to be adopted at scale industry-wide for that reason. We see problems like this in case studies like the paper straw, which we point to all the time at Impact. It's a classic example of when convenience is reduced, if even slightly, for the consumer, you're not going to see that mass adoption. So we there was a huge push for paper straws over the last few years, and businesses tried to switch over to them, but consumers just quite simply don't like them. I don't like them. When we think about it, truthfully speaking, the paper straw isn't that bad, but it just reduces that convenience factor by a little bit, and you're not going to see that adoption. I'm certainly guilty of it myself. I try and bring reusables, but it's illustrative of that point. So reusable packaging, to contrast, as the most logical alternative to single use, it has strong potential, and it definitely is needed in certain spaces. There are use cases where it can be very strong, but the fact of the matter is that it's difficult to implement for many use cases, and we're just not going to see single use packaging going away. That's the fact of the matter. So what are the alternatives then? We know that we have to go with single use packaging, but what options are actually available for companies that want to move to better practices, but have to maintain that quality and convenience standard for consumers? So the obvious direction there is recyclable and compostable packaging. So the first problem here is infrastructure shortcomings with recyclables and compostables, and I'll start with recyclables. Recyclables are a common fallback material. We've had recyclables for many years. We have pretty well established waste streams. Most municipalities accept recyclables. The problem is that about 9% of recyclables actually end up being recycled, which is a pretty abysmal rate. The other problem is that materials can't be recycled indefinitely. So even though, thinking back to that price per wear model, even though you might get a better price per wear out of a recyclable because the material can be used several times, it's still going to end up in a landfill at the end of its life. That's a fact. And if it's a petroleum plastic, it's still going to take millennia to biodegrade. So we look at recyclables as a step up from petroleum, single-use virgin petroleum plastics, but they still are fraught with lots of challenges. Petroleum plastics, like recyclables, can actually be the breaking down. We've all heard this, that it takes a long time for petroleum plastics to break down. It is sometimes not just the time, but the way in which it breaks down that is really harmful. So sometimes they don't actually fully biodegrade. They just break down into microplastics, which have been in the news a lot more recently, which find their way into ecosystems, including our food supply. We actually eat about a credit card's worth of plastic every week. So what about compostables? Compostables are a really, really good alternative to this problem because they're designed not to leave a trace. So under the right conditions, compostables will essentially turn into biomass. They don't leave those microplastics. It's seemingly a very good alternative, but the infrastructure challenge that's introduced with compostables comes down to where it is composted. So there are different kinds of compostables, and the most common is an industrial compostable uh, bioplastic. And the reason for this is because industrial compostables have a higher barrier property. So it's easier to introduce them for many different use cases, packaging wise. But the problem with industrial compostables is you need an industrial compost facility for that material to biodegrade. And that's really challenging, particularly in the US, where we have a hard time recycling things. Even fewer industrial compostables end up where they actually need to be. Uh, it's a kind of harrowing reality. We believe that using industrial compostables is still important. That's because it drives demand. So when we're talking about consumer demand um, in the U.S., waste streams are often it's a private industry, so they're never going to lead with infrastructure. No one's going to build an industrial compost facility and say, "All right, great. I hope people start using industrial compost materials now." Because that would be really, really cool for this facility that I just built. That's not going to happen. What needs to happen first is industrially compostable materials need to end up in our waste streams. And when they make up a significant enough volume, the infrastructure is going to follow. So I encourage companies to use industrial compostables if it's the best option available to them, because it helps to incentivize that infrastructure. So going back, spending is the most powerful form of activism. That commercial spending can be impactful also. That said, for impact snacks, we wanted to raise the bar a little, and we were wondering if we could do more. So I've talked a lot about the challenges that we were entering the space under, and what led us to the decisions that we made for our product. And when we launched our two signature flavors, which are dark chocolate brownie and iced caramel latte, founder Corey has a sweet tooth, and they taste like desserts. And the choices we made for these products, beginning with packaging and the compostability standards, is we wanted a compostable wrapper. It doesn't have that lingering end of life, but that compostability standard we wanted to elevate to home compostable. So that is contrasted with industrial compostable, and that it sidesteps the infrastructure challenges that plague industrial compostable materials. So a home compostable bioplastic, as the name implies, that standard means that it is suitable to be composted essentially in any environment. So the composting is still activated by moisture and by warmth, like any composting system. That said, the barrier properties are low enough, and the makeup of the material means that it's suitable for just about any environment. And what that means is that even if this material ends up in an environment somewhere, it's still going to break down in a reasonable amount of time, which is about 30 days according to the standard. Our bioplastic, we wanted it to be able to compost in home compost and also marine environments, in case it ends up in a marine environment. And we also wanted it to be safe enough to eat, or anaerobically digestible. And that's a fun one. So when we think about historical paradigms around packaging, packaging was almost always safe enough to eat. It's only recently in human history that our packaging has not been safe enough to eat. So when you think about how long humans have been trouncing around and what we've eaten, think about fruits. We don't usually eat the packaging, but it's still safe. It's still edible. Even all kinds of food, even up until a few centuries ago, the way that we would package things. Whether we used waxed canvas to package things, or even metal containers, those things are safe. You wouldn't always eat them, but they're not carcinogenic. And I always wonder what our ancestors would think if they saw us eating things out of packaging that had all these kind of nasty properties to them. So we wanted packaging that was safe enough to eat, because that's the standard that humans have been used to for most of time, and that's kind of changed. The second big innovation as it relates to packaging was modularizing the packaging system. So what that meant for us is that we are going to package our bars in boxes, in inner boxes of 7. These boxes of 7 can also double as a display case. So it's not just to hold them, but in a retail setting, this box can be adapted through some cutoffs for the counter display. So now we're not having to do a second run of a different packaging, different paperboard box for our packaging displays. These inner boxes, 4 of them fit seamlessly inside of our mailer. So by kind of really tightening up that packaging, we're able to reduce negative space fills, except if a consumer was to purchase less than 4. We have our mailers designed to fit 4, and that's how many boxes we recommend in a purchase. It fills that mailer up perfectly, and so we don't need any other negative space fill inside of there, and it lets us fit multiple combinations of quantities and flavors efficiently. So through that system, we're able to meet basically any ratio of the flavors that a consumer would want to order online. So it's just a way of reducing packaging. We see it's the natural packaging reduction is the natural evolution there, because in most cases it's cheaper to have smaller packaging. But we've seen a push from that recently also for environmental reasons, to save packaging. We see that with the Amazon Climate Pledge Friendly certification. One of their requirements has to do with minimal packaging, and they have actually pretty strict requirements about the ratio of product to packaging that your product can have. And then the last piece here is we're going to make a really efficient, and we're going to make a carbon neutral supply chain, and we're actually going to make it 2.5 times carbon neutral to account for any errors in the assessment there, and to make sure that we're kind of really putting good out. So what that means is we're going to string together manufacturers. We're going to try and get infrastructure that can do as much in-house as possible to reduce the number of nodes, to try and reduce transportation of the product as much as possible. We're going to reduce our materials. We're going to find the best end-of-life streams, as I mentioned, which helps to reduce that carbon footprint. And then where we're not able to reduce our footprint, we're going to offset it. That's where we get that negativity status is able to come from, is through those offsets. But we are a reduction first company, and we can only endorse that for others that want to follow the path, is that you have to reduce your footprint as much as you're able to before you look into offsets. Offsets are a band-aid solution that we're going to use to try and do better, but we're not going to use them as the sole avenue for trying to achieve our neutrality or negativity status. And the last kind of big choice that we have to make, drawing back to the earlier point, is that price and quality is super important. We know now that consumers won't make the right choice if it's inconvenient to them. So what we're going to do is make a price and quality equivalent product. We wanted to do all of these things, but all of these things are not important if it costs more or if the quality is lower than a competitor. So we always like to say that Impact Snacks aren't, it's not a sustainable snacking company. It's just a superfood bar company. And the fact that we're operating in best practice is a byproduct that is important, but at the end of the day, someone should be able to choose us equivalently with any other superfood snack bar product on the market when it comes to nutrition and convenience. The problem is that applying all of the things that we talked about, so modularity, home compostability, carbon negativity, all that technology to a product that has price and quality parity is a huge challenge, particularly when we talk about that packaging. We want the material to look, feel, and have the utility of traditional petroleum plastic, but it needs to be home compostable and anaerobically digestible. If it sounds like a challenge, it totally is. So one of the big challenges when it comes to packaging in general is that we want the packaging to be pristine while it's on the shelf, for as long as it's on the shelf, but we want it to disappear as soon as it's used, whenever that may be. That is incredibly hard to engineer, and the only way really to achieve that effect is to balance the material and the product in the use case very carefully. So essentially, you need to balance a material that is going to stick around long enough to serve your product. You need to engineer a product that is effective for use with this packaging, and then you need to kind of set your shelf life accordingly and properly, so that the material ends up in waste streams when it needs to be able to do what it does. The problem here is that when you think of materials and barrier properties on that scale, and the ones that are best for composting, that go away the easiest, as you can imagine, have the most difficulty interacting with the product because they provide the least barrier properties. So we ran into this difficulties with moisture and oil barriers. If these properties are too high, you're actually going to degrade the packaging on the shelf. We often think about packaging protecting the product and this kind of structured dynamic, but we don't think about the product protecting the packaging, and that's what we ran into. So you need to lower certain factors like the moisture property, but when you go too low, it makes for a really dry bar. And now you have to grab a bottle of water every time you need to take a bite. So it really comes down to balance. There isn't a cut and dry, not yet anywhere. There's no magic material that solves all of these problems. You have to balance material engineering, packaging engineering, and supply chain engineering. They need to work in synchronicity to deliver the results that you want. We had to do a lot of special testing on materials to find out if it was suitable for the shelf life, if it was suitable for the barrier properties. And in the end, the bars had to be engineered just about as much as the packaging themselves. So even when it comes down to structural engineering of the way the bar is, I'll say constructed, to sort of nest certain properties of the material, so they don't interplay with the packaging. A lot of engineering has to go into that, and it really becomes this delicate and intelligent symphony of different materials interacting with one another. So we settled on a bioplastic film that meets our compostability standards, and passed the test for barrier properties, for a 1-year shelf life for the product. The shelf life is a little bit shorter than other products. It's was a choice that we made that would make it difficult to move into the retail route. The fact of the matter, though, is that you're never going to get a perfect solution. It comes down to compromise in certain places, and we had to compromise a little for shelf life. Drawing on history a little bit again, when we think about shelf life, there aren't a lot of materials that don't have a really long shelf life. So what we're producing here is not super abnormal when we think about the paradigms of food for most of human history. It's only recently that you can lose a McDonald's fry under the seat for 20 years and have it look exactly the same when you see it again. One of the other challenges that we had with these materials, so we've settled on this bioplastic film, but when we're talking about materials and end of life streams, one of the most important factors is matching end of life streams for married materials. So basically, if the two materials are going to enter the waste stream together, they have to go to the same waste stream. And one of the places that we see this most often among other brands is stickers. So if you have a recyclable carton, but your sticker is not recyclable, then essentially both have to go to landfill. We saw this actually with another company. They wanted to engineer a packaging system using the best materials, and because of some barrier property concerns, they had to have a tray that was home compostable, but a liner that was recyclable, and they were melded together. And at first, it looked like, great, we have a recyclable liner and a home compostable tray. This is the best tray that we could possibly make. The problem is that compostables can't be recycled, and recyclables can't be composted. So unless those two materials can be separated, in trying to do the best thing, you've actually made a material that is totally useless as far as waste streams go, and it actually just quite simply has to go to landfill. So marrying material end of life streams is really important. You can't just try and do the best. If we think of materials end of life streams as a hierarchy from compostability to virgin materials, you can't just try and do your best. You have to be deliberate about it in marrying those end of life streams. What that meant for us was when we're talking about ink for our bioplastic wrapper to print on, the inks also have to be home compostable. So we had to find a soy-based ink that actually has a really high quality print color, and one that was also suitable for home compost. And actually, you can I've done this at home. If you run it under the sink for long enough, you can actually kind of like scratch it off, which is pretty cool demonstration of how well it kind of can disappear. The inks, and going back to the idea is that we wanted to be a superfood bar first and foremost. Because of the quality of the ink that we were using, we opted to actually use a really bright artificial color. So the bars are this kind of bright purple in this really luminescent salmon color for the two flavors. And you think a lot of brands that explore these options, we've all seen opt for green, they opt for blue, they choose those traditional colors. We wanted to do something that was deliberately artificial looking, almost to make a point that a good product doesn't necessarily have to be an earthy, crunchy product. It can just be something that is price and quality comparable. That's also good. And then going back to end of life streams for packaging, a little bit more straightforward. The paper boards that we use, so the inner boxes, and also the corrugate mailers, have to be recyclable also. Matching those end of life streams can add convenience for the customer too. So I think we're going to start to see the debut of packaging systems as direct to consumer becomes more popular too, and we have multi-layered packaging systems. We're going to start to see consumers getting packaging systems with end of life instructions. So recycle this, compost this. Having those consolidated where possible adds convenience to the consumer and helps to bump those kind of 9% numbers up. The thing though is that we can't just have the materials and have them work. We also need to be able to produce our product with them, and the implementation becomes really challenging. And this is where we see those infrastructural gaps come into play. So the bioplastic film that we settled on that made it through all of these tests isn't suitable for most flow wrapping machines. So the machines that most suppliers had to package the bars, it doesn't work. So we actually had to search far and wide for a partner who was willing to invest in the machine that was able to handle this type of flow wrap, the supplier was open-minded enough to kind of see around the corner and see that more folks were going to be looking for this material capability, and they agreed to support our product. So we've navigated all these difficulties with the barrier properties, with inconsistencies in the waste streams, with infrastructure gaps. We've done the testing, we've done the engineering, we've built our product, the superfood bar, with the home compostable wrapper and the modular packaging system and carbon negative supply chain. The proof of concept now comes with our Kickstarter launch. So we launched on Kickstarter in the late summer 2020, and the goal was filled in 13 hours. By the end of the funding period, we had completely doubled the goal, which was absolutely astounding and beyond our expectations. So thinking back to that early work in the apparel industry, we can see that this kind of thing resonates with consumers. When consumers have the opportunity to support businesses that are transitioning or that are helping to facilitate the transition to the circular economy, they respond swiftly and strongly. It's pretty resounding, and that was really, really powerful to see. So where are we at now? There's no rolling credits with freeze frames for our team after conducting this. So since the initial product launch, we've been exploring other materials and other use cases, both for internal products and in B2B capacities. So that might look like bioplastic stand-up pouches for upcycled fruit bites. Stand-up pouches are a huge vertical in the packaging space. And there's a lot of potential and a lot of technology going into bioplastic alternatives. That's an example of an industrial compostable material that we're happy to support demand for end of life infrastructure for industrially compostable materials. Bioplastic stand-up pouches have a lot of the similar challenges in that sometimes special machinery is needed to fill them at the co-packing stage. But also, what can we do for frozen direct-to-consumer products? So how do bioplastics interact with dry ice? And can we engineer packaging systems to effectively distribute cooling throughout the packaging system while insulating the bioplastic itself to prevent it from becoming brittle? So if we think of the diversity within the packaging space, there's so many different opportunities that we can try and apply these best practices to, and make kind of circular transitions. So overall, from 30,000 feet, we look at impact as a case study, and we consider it a mission success. You can take a single-use, fast-moving CPG product and make it plastic-free. You can make it 2.5 times carbon negative, and most importantly, you can make it that it has quality and price parity with any competitors. It's possible to do. Looking back at where we started, the world looks not as dissimilar from it as I think we would like, but it also is very different. There's been a lot of changes. I think that we can all agree in the last year, and we're hoping that through that period, through that time, we were able to help people snack better, but also more importantly that the product, the process, and the mission can be leveraged by others, and that we can make this transition we can make the transition for consumer goods to go circular.